Hey, everybody, thanks so much for joining us here on 9 News Watch. I'm meteorologist Chris Bianchi, and joining me this afternoon is meteorologist Cory Reppenhagen. We're going to get a little nerdy, not too nerdy, but promise we'll make this interesting. Um, we had a fascinating, and what is interesting about this, Cory, is that we had a fascinating 2 foot, very kind of narrow 2 foot band of snow that draped across the eastern reaches of Colorado into western Kansas. Very localized, though, maybe, and we'll show it to you here in just a minute. It's maybe 50 miles wide or so. In fact, probably a little less than that. And Cory, we kind of want to get into some of the reasons why we saw Denver, we saw 3, 4, 5 inches worth of snow yesterday. Then you go about 150 miles east of here, we get this narrow stripe of, in some cases, 2 feet plus worth of snowfall. Cory, to me, what stands out is how small that band was and how kind of rare it is to get just such a narrow band of that heavy snow.
Yeah, it's completely fascinating too. Just what all went into it and all the variables that had to come together at just the right time for that to happen was pretty amazing. And yeah, like the size, like you said, there was some areas of that band that was only about 5 to 10 miles wide. So you can literally look at the snow totals and see where there's like a 5 to 6 mile difference between the 26-foot total and the 6 foot total. This is just amazing.
And by the way, the town with the highest total in Colorado was Bethune, which got 26 inches. Fun fact also for fellow Colorado weather nerds, that is also the town that is home to the largest hailstone ever recorded in the state of Colorado. And Cory, you know something about large hail. So double dipping there in Bethune. 26-inch snowstorm yesterday, more than 2 feet. And then also the largest hailstone on record recorded in that same town of about 200 people. Now, Cory, kind of getting into the dynamics of this, I guess meteorologically, how do we get this narrow little, almost snake-like sliver of 2 feet of snow while, as you mentioned, the rest of the state, there's a look at where we did see some of that very heavy snowfall again. In some cases, as much as 27 inches, as low, quote unquote, as 10 inches. But Cory, how do we get something like this where it's so narrow, and how did it form yesterday?
Yeah, a lot of variables had to come together at just the right time for this. And one of the main things, we kind of call it a convergence zone because it's kind of an area where two air masses converge upon each other. And if you look at it, what we had yesterday was this air mass that was kind of up in the northeast part of the country that was pushing Arctic air towards the northeast. So it was kind of a front that was kind of backing into Colorado from the northeast, and all that air coming in to Colorado from the northeast, kind of at the surface, was coming out of the northeast, so really cold air. And then we had another little trough coming around the west side of Colorado, and low pressure developed in like right over the state of Colorado, which had wind direction coming more out of the west southwest. And so those two air masses were colliding right there. And so we had a convergence, and that convergence already creates lift, what we need to get snow going, because not only does the air coming together create lift, but also the cold air and the less cold air coming together creates that lift when you get that really cold air over top. And then the other factors that kind of had to all happen at the same time was we had the jet stream right overhead that was booking at a pretty decent pace. And with the jet stream coming out of kind of the west, maybe a little bit of southwest turn with that trough over Colorado, that jet stream over the top of that collision created additional lift because that fast moving air at the top, air from the surface kind of has to rush up to fill that void left by that fast moving air on top. And then you also had to have an upslope component. And a lot of people don't think about that in eastern Colorado, right? Because we think of eastern plains as kind of being flat. But when the air is coming in from the northeast at the surface in Colorado, it's rising the whole time. It's gaining altitude, elevation all this time. Yuma County is our lowest county, our lowest point, but even in particular, that part of Kit Carson County and South Washington County is quite a bit higher. So in that very localized region from Yuma County and maybe St. Francis over in Kansas, you're getting quite a bit of a rise right there up into Goodland, Burlington, Kirk, Bethune. And so you had additional, and that upslope was very kind of deep. So it was reaching from the surface all the way up to about 10,000 feet, that air coming in from the northeast. So as that air rises, hitting that elevation, it kind of pushes everything upwards. And so you get additional lift. And then the only other weird thing about this is that the thing didn't move. So that you get these bands, but it didn't move because those two colliding, competing air masses were not able to. It was kind of a stalemate. When you're having a tug of war and you're about as strong as the other guy, you're not. No one can really get that rope to move. And so eventually the northeast flow did prevail, and that thing gradually started to drift out of there to the southeast. But all those things just kind of had to come together at just the right time to get that insanity.
I mean, sort of a perfect storm if a storm was 25 miles wide. Um, in this case, I guess in your experience, how rare is it to see a band as strong and as localized as the one we saw yesterday?
That's pretty rare to get them to last that long. I mean, we see them with just about every storm because of our proximity to the Rocky Mountains. We get those colliding air masses all the time, and we've seen these snow bands like this. Just think like you and I were talking earlier about how what this would do to the Denver metro if we got something like this. I mean, it would just destroy the
Oh
place.
man,
But
yeah.
we have we've had them, and they do happen. I can remember a specific instance in January 28th, 2019. We had a what I call these super bands because we have snow bands and then we have super bands because they last so much longer and they deliver so much more powerful snow. But that day on the 28th of January 2019, the forecast was it was a 2 to 5 inch storm. We were expecting a 5 inch max, and DIA got a little less than 3 inches. I got 3 inches or so at my place in North Arvada. But this super band set up, and there were parts of the Broomfield, Westminster area that got 12 to 14 inches of snow because this band would not move. It just stayed right there. And in that case, it was kind of a situation where there was a more localized circulation. So we had northeast upslope, but sometimes Denver is sitting down in this little bowl and it's surrounded by higher terrain. And when northeast winds come in there, it creates kind of a little bit of a cyclonic circulation. A lot of people call it the Denver cyclone. And that creates areas of convergence where the Denver cyclone hits the foothills, and then on the other side as well, where the Denver cyclone hits that northeast flow. And we got a super band that day, and so they do happen. They even happen, in the summertime when we have thunderstorms. But when you're expecting 1 inch of rain and you get 2 inches of rain, it's not really noticeable. But when you're expecting 6 inches of snow and you get 20 inches of snow, that's when you notice it.
That's when you get a lot of those fun emails as a meteorologist, right, Corey?
We love those.
We love those. Now, we're looking. By the way, we're looking at the band again here as it stretched from northwest to southeast. And Corey, this lasted. I mean, you mentioned how long it lasted. It looks like really in earnest that this was a 6 to 8 hour plus band where we were probably looking at 2 to 3 inch per hour snowfall rate. So think about that: 2 to 3 inch per hour snowfall for about 6 to maybe as much as 8 hours over the same area. Closed down parts of I-70 yesterday, needless to say, led to a real mess out there. But again, I mean, it can't reemphasize enough just how exceedingly rare in my experience, and you, Corey, you got more experience than I do here, it was to see something this localized and this long lived.
It's amazing. I mean, it really is just to actually see it unfold. That's why I love these winter storms in general, just
Mm-hmm.
because, yeah, you're going to have your 90% just whatever. It just, whatever is expected just happens. And then you're going to get that other 10%. Is it going to be, is it going to be a 4 footer in the foothills, or is it going to be this super band out on the Eastern Plains? You don't know what that weird 10% is going to be. So it's really unusual and it's cool to see. And Another thing to look at, Chris, is that these can actually be forecast. Remember, even like 2 days before, you and I were texting each other about banding potential, and the all the computer forecast models were showing this band out mainly in western Kansas, but a few every couple of runs of the computer model would show this band kind of pushing into Colorado a little bit. And the National Weather Service in Goodland, which is actually the forecast office for the Colorado counties of Yuma, Kit Carson, and Cheyenne counties, they had that in their forecast, that band. They were showing it. And in their forecast discussion, they mentioned that there may be, you can expect 8+ inches of snow in that band somewhere. And as it turns out, I mean, they weren't far off. I mean, this band ended up being a little bit further to the northwest than the computer models and the National Weather Service had indicated. But when you're talking about a band that is that small, it's very difficult to hit the placement. And then as far as figuring out how long they're going to last, that's almost a complete crapshoot. You really just have to go with general terms where you think that in general the northerly flow is going to prevail and move this thing. Might be slow and it might last in 1 to 2 hours in one spot, but to predict that it's going to last for 8 to 9 hours, you just can't do it.
Well, speaking of predictions, tomorrow we get a similar type of system, maybe not as long lasting, maybe a little bit quicker than what we saw yesterday, but similar looking kind of system. You gonna go on a limb and see predict 2 feet of snow for somebody for tomorrow?
I'm always rooting for an upset. Like I always want something to happen. I think Kathy Saban has learned to kind of hate me in a little bit of a sense on the side because I'm always rooting for the forecast to bust. But in general, it looks like it looks pretty basic. Where we're gonna get some heavy stuff, and we're gonna have a 2 to 3 hour window of pretty good impact there for the Denver metro area, and it'll be during the commute. Like I don't know what you're thinking, maybe 7, 8, 9 o'clock for some heavy, and they will be bands, because that's what will be coming through. But all the indications, like how can we maybe get a super band out of this? The jet will be there. The northeast flow will be there upslope. So it just doesn't. The normal the upslope is a little shallower. The moisture is a little shallower. The duration is a little less. I think I wouldn't sleep on it though, because if we get 3.5 inches in 3.5 hours during the commute, that could be big. And who knows? I don't know if the National Weather Service has issued. I haven't looked yet to see if they put an advisory out. They may not, because in general, for an advisory in the metro, you're talking of the probability of 4 inch totals or higher have to be pretty good. And I think the 4 inch line is pretty close to maybe advisory, but who knows what they'll do.
Yeah, they were saying in their discussion that they're thinking about it, but they're not there yet. They haven't issued, as of before we hopped on here about half an hour ago, I haven't seen them issue an advisory yet. In fact, I could tell you right now, they have not issued an advisory. So, but they were talking about it to your point. I think it's one of those things, and it's a real credit to the Weather Service. They're starting to think about commute times a bit more, anything that's a bit more borderline. And this is, I think, you mentioned that 2019 event. I think that was the event which drove them to start issuing advisories for commute times, because that event, if you remember, did not have a winter weather advisory with it. And a lot of, I think, broadcast meteorologists, including ourselves, I know I publicly said, please issue advisories, even if it's borderline, if we're talking 1 to 3, 2 to 4, but there's the potential for 4 inches plus, just because of what happened that day. They start, and much to their credit, they started issuing those advisories.
Yeah, and I remember that day as well, because the timing was very similar to tomorrow's storm, because I remember when I was getting the kids ready for school at about 7 o'clock, there wasn't a lot of action. It was snowing,
Mm.
and you're thinking, okay, yeah, I'm going to get 3 inches. That's everyone's going to get 3 inches, and then by the time I was walking them to school, it was coming down. I'm like, oh my God, do I got to go? Should I go into work, or what's happening here? This looks like it's going to be insane. Because I live in North Arvada, and that band ended up setting up just to the north of me. So we got hit by it for a little while. And so I ended up, hopping in the Titan and going right out there. And I remember it just didn't stop. I mean, it was 4 hours of mayhem. They probably got a good bulk of that 14 inches in that 4 hours. It was insane.
Oh my goodness. Hopefully, well, you and I might be the only ones kind of rooting for that. And even in my case, I'm going to say I'm kind of rooting for it because it's never fun to blow a forecast. But you're definitely rooting for it, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I do root for it, and I know that it's just like rooting for underdogs, in gambling, sports gambling. You know that in general, you're going to lose 85% of the time if you're rooting for underdogs. But when that 5 to 10% thing comes along, where you're hitting big money out there with a 12-inch upset, you're thinking, man, that was just so worth it. It's just exciting.
Yeah.
But in general, I
Well,
mean, the forecast does play.
I was going to say that Bethune and Burlington hit that jackpot, or unless, yeah, Mount Sunflower in Western Kansas, the highest point in Kansas, getting 27 inches of snow yesterday. I mean, stunning stuff that we saw yesterday. Again, I would say hopefully we don't see that here into the metro tomorrow. That would be quite the impact if we ended up with a foot or two of snow, but hopefully not.
Yeah, yeah, and those guys, I mean, out there, they are, I think, always rooting for moisture because, I mean,
True.
their business, I mean, they're making food for us, so they need that moisture. And if you think about winter wheat that's been sitting in the ground there drying through December, and it was a hot December, it really needed that moisture so bad, for it to, when it comes up in March, to be healthy. So for them, you don't hear a lot of complaints about a busted
Mm.
forecast out there because that moisture is amazing. I think that some areas reported close to 2 inches of water out of that storm, which is sometimes all they get an entire winter. I mean, I think the Colorado Climate Center tweeted out this morning that it was the third largest single day snow total in Burlington history, the co-op station in Burlington. So for them, I don't know, they might be on my side with it.
A friend of mine, good friend of mine, who's a cattle rancher out in Hugo, texted me in caps, "Great job." Not that I had anything to do with it, of course, but um,
Yeah,
he was thrilled about this.
that's great. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, we can take credit because we take the hits when it doesn't work out. So I don't know. It's good.
I'll take the credit for the busted forecast, even though we had nothing to do with it. But well, Cory, we appreciate a few minutes of your time here to nerd out and talk about that ridiculous band that we saw yesterday. It was absolutely off the chain, or off the rails, I guess is the best way to put it. I haven't seen anything like that in some time, but I appreciate your expertise and your insight. I know you wish you were there, but glad to have you with us in the North Arvada studio to chat about this today.
Yeah, always great to nerd out with you, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Cory.